Welcome, seekers of hidden knowledge, to the mystical realm of the occult. Delve into the secrets of the universe as we journey together into the enigmatic world of ancient wisdom. Brought to you by your guide through the shadows of enlightenment, Wisdom Rocker. Uncover the mysteries, unlock the power, and journey with us as we explore the hidden depths within the pages of forgotten scrolls and ancient texts. Prepare to embark on a journey beyond the ordinary, where wisdom transcends time and knowledge is your greatest ally. Welcome to Wisdom Rocker. Prepare to awaken your inner sage. In this video, we will be uncovering the wisdom within the chapters of
Lectures on Ancient Philosophy. Written by Manly P. Hall. Chapter 9. The Cycle of Necessity. What relationship does the little life we know bear to that vaster existence which is our hope and which Rabelais would call the great? Perhaps three questions have ever vexed the rational faculties of mankind. Life is the beginning of what? Love is the fulfillment of what? Death is the end of what? The essential attribute of an enduring religion or philosophy is the rational solution which it offers to this threefold riddle. If physical existence be regarded as the whole of life, then the hopelessness and inconsistency of the scheme is apparent. For as Manilius writes, we begin to die as soon as we are born, and the end is linked to the beginning. Hence universal order can only be restored when we regard physical existence as a fragment of a nobler and more complete cycle of duration. Somewhere in the chain of his speculation the philosopher will ask, is the corporeal state natural or accidental to man? In other words, is man destined by virtue of inherent qualities to abide forever as a terrene creature, or is he, like the hero of that Gnostic classic, the hymn of the robe of glory, an exiled prince seeking the way which leads back to his father's kingdom, the spiritual dawn land? Knowledge of the purpose of life is essential to right living. Unless we comprehend, in part at least, the order of which we are a minute but consequential part, we cannot achieve the greatest good here and now. The past and future like mighty trees meet overhead and shadow the present. The field of today's endeavor is bounded on the one hand by unborn tomorrow and on the other by dead yesterday. Our attitudes toward these opposites, the fateful past and the destined future, must be the measure of our present achievements. When he says, the present only is great, the past is dead, the opportunist little realizes that he himself is the past, for all that goes before lives again in that which follows after. The today man worships is but a fleeting second, yesterday was without beginning and tomorrow without end, yet all are embraced within the span of the eternal philosophic now. From the obscure fountains of futurity the waters of time flow down through the turbulent cataracts of present endeavor to mingle finally with the boundless ocean of the past. All men worship either life or death. Philosophers worship life by affirming it to be imperishable. The non-philosophic worship death by accepting it as a reality. Being essentially incorporeal, life is not limited to place, but in the terms of Neoplatonism is everywhere, not with interval, but impartably. In his auxiliaries to the perception of intelligible natures, Porphyry tells us that things essentially incorporeal are not locally present with bodies, but are present with them when they please, by verging toward them so far as they are naturally adapted so to verge. They are not, however, present with them locally, but through habitude, proximity and alliance. Being free from the limitations of place, used in its Platonic sense, life animates forms by approaching them, and by its subsequent withdrawal into its own nature causes the forms to exhibit the phenomenon called death. In its physical sense, life results from the temporary association of an incorporeal agent with a corporeal patient. Bodies, being corporeal, occupy place, and an interval exists between them regardless of their apparent proximity. When life which exists without such interval animates form, an illusion is created which causes the uninformed to assume that life itself is subject to the confining bounds of place. Being incorporeal. The gods were not limited to place but exercised their azonic privilege of being distributed according to will throughout the entire substance of creation. This explains the popular belief that God is everywhere and hence with equal efficiency may be addressed by multitudes in various places simultaneously. While life is essentially ethereal and in constant activity, form is essentially dense and static. In combination with form, life animates form to a certain degree. Conversely, form is an impediment to the flow of life. The result is that physical manifestation is a paradoxical state wherein life appears less than itself and matter more than itself. At death, form reverts to its natural state of inertia, while life returns to its normal condition of uninterrupted flow. In his treatise, On the Wanderings of Ulysses, Thomas Taylor, drawing upon the Ulixus Aeroribus, the work of an anonymous Greek writer, declares that Homer used the Trojan War as a symbol of the battle between the rational faculties, the Greeks, and the irrational faculties, the Trojans. Thomas Taylor notes that Homer is reputed to have been blind because, as Proclus observes, he separated himself from sensible beauty and extended the intellect of his soul to invisible and true harmony. He was said, therefore, to be blind because that intellectual beauty to which he raised himself cannot be perceived by corporeal eyes. In the 13th book of the Odyssey, Homer describes in veiled language a mysterious cave by which the Orphic philosophy concerning the mystery of life and death is obscurely set forth. High at the head a branching olive grows, and crowns the pointed cliffs with shady boughs. A cavern pleasant, though involved in night. Beneath it lies, the Naiads' delight. Where bowls and urns of workmanship divine and massy beams in native marble shine, on which the nymphs amazing webs display, or purple hue and exquisite array. The busy bees within the urns secure honey delicious and like nectar pure. Perpetual waters through the grotto glide. A lofty gate unfolds on either side. That to the north is pervious to mankind. The sacred south to immortals is consigned. In his essay on the Cave of the Nymphs, Porphyry discusses at some length the occult significance of Homer's cavern. The gist of Porphyry's conclusions, which he derives from various ancient authors, Egyptian, Greek and Persian, is as follows. The ancients consecrated caves as symbols of the world and that, like the world, they were produced from an internal and not an external cause. The Persian mystics signified the descent of the soul into the sublunary regions and its regression therefrom by initiating their mystics in caverns. As temples, groves and altars were established in honor of the gods, so grottos were also dedicated to the nymphs, or naiads, because of the water which trickled down the walls. In the 7th book of his Republic, Plato writes, "Behold men as if dwelling in a subterranean cavern and in a den-like habitation, whose entrance is widely expanded to the admission of the light through the whole cave." The ancient theologists considered caverns as appropriate symbols of mundane powers and of the sensible world, because these rocky openings are dark, stony and humid. Furthermore, the dampness existing in the cave was analogous to the humidity of the world, which the Greeks conceived to be indispensable to the generation of souls. The soul may be platonically defined as the first of bodies and the individualized source of bodily life. Heraclitus says, that moisture appears delightful and not deadly to souls. The etheric humidity which incarnating souls find indispensable to their body-building processes caused the philosophers to declare that these souls must be profoundly steeped or drenched in moisture as they enter into the sphere of generation. But pure souls do not desire to generate and hence absent themselves from the sphere of humidity, which causes Heraclitus to remark, "A dry soul is the wisest." Porphyry then declares that souls proceeding into generation and enveloped in this ethereal moisture are properly called naiads. The naiads are nymphs, presumably water spirits, and their esoteric meaning as given above was revealed only to the initiated. The cavern is therefore a temple sacred to the processes of generation and signifies not only the world in which generated souls reside, but, although Porphyry does not bring out the fact, also the womb from which the philosophic elect are liberated by the second birth. The bowls and urns which, according to Homer, are contained in the cave, are not only appropriate emblems of the aquatic nymphs but are also symbols of Bacchus, and being composed of baked earth signify the bodies into which the corporeal souls descend. Here we have the vessels of various shapes which Omar Khayyam refers to in his Rubaiyat. Homer then describes the purple webs which the nymphs weave on marble looms. The spinning of the web represents the building of the fleshly body with its arteries, veins, nerves and muscles upon the shining framework of the bones. This is the garment with which the incarnating soul is to be invested, but which, alas, is to prove a net to ensnare and hold captive the rational virtues. The heavens are called a veil by the ancients, by whom they are regarded as the vestments of the celestial gods. The honey which the busy bees store away in the bowls and amphorae has two significances. Honey was regarded by the ancients as both a preservative and also a purifier. The Persians used honey in their sacrifices as a symbol of the preserving and defending powers. Honey further signifies mortal and transitory pleasure as distinguished from divine and enduring pleasure. In the ancient mythology, Saturn, being intoxicated with honey, sleeps and while in this condition is robbed of his empire by Jupiter. This fable obscurely intimates that the soul is robbed of its divinity when it becomes intoxicated by the illusionary happiness of the corporeal sphere. Porphyry also gives a third interpretation to honey, which he declares was used to signify death, an interpretation dependent upon the previous assumption that it befuddled the divine perceptions. Gall he declares to be a symbol of life, adding, in comparing the two, that the life of the soul dies through pleasure, honey, but through bitterness, gall, the soul resumes its life. Bees, here termed the ox-begotten, are symbols of just souls entering into generation both because of their industry and because they instinctively return to that place from which they first came, for the just soul instinctively returns to its divine and unlimited condition. In his Scholia on the Phaedrus of Plato, Hermias declares that the nectar and ambrosia of the gods are to be understood as possessing a profound philosophic meaning. He writes, ambrosia is analogous to dry nutriment and on this account it signifies an establishment in causes, but nectar is analogous to moist food and signifies the providential attention of the gods to secondary natures. Referring to the gates leading into and out of the cavern, Porphyry declares them to represent the winter and summer solstices, Capricorn and Cancer respectively, adding that as Cancer is nearest to us it is very properly attributed to the moon, which is the nearest of the heavenly bodies to the earth, but as the southern pole by its distance is invisible to us, Capricorn is attributed to Saturn, the most remote of the planets. The Orphic theologists add that Cancer is the gate through which souls descend into generation and Capricorn the gate through which they ascend again, in that the north is appropriate to descend but the south to ascend. The north gate of the cavern is therefore said to be pervious to the descent of men, but the south gate is called the avenue not of the gods but of souls, the immortals, ascending to the gods. The ancients likewise connected the winds with souls proceeding into generation or escaping therefrom, declaring that the north winds aid generation and refresh the dying, but the south winds dissolve life. But one symbol remains to be explained, namely, the branching olive that grows above the cave. The olive is the plant of Minerva, and Minerva having been produced from the head of Jupiter is the proper symbol of wisdom. It was customary to place this plant over the gates and arches to signify that the universe, the world symbolized by the cavern, is not the product of casual effort or the work of irrational fortune, but the offspring of an intellectual nature and a divine wisdom. The olive is also the plant with which the victor in the race of life is crowned, thus, revealing the mystic fact that he who vanquishes or outruns his lesser nature will be rewarded with wisdom's crown. The cycle of necessity is the term applied to that period or condition through which man must pass in the attainment of conscious immortality, conscious in the sense of illumined realization as distinguished from that immortality of which we all partake in common but which remains unrecognized until philosophic perception grasps its true import. In his pilgrimage to the holy city, man must pass through the valley called Jehoshaphat, or the place of dry bones. Here grisly specters rise from their moss-grown sarcophagi to perform the weird gyrations of the dance of death. Every gesture of the irrational life is part of a ghastly pageantry, for the cradle stands within the open grave. Philosophy alone can bestow upon man the precious gift of immortality, for though every human soul is innately divine and beyond dissolution, it cannot partake of its own permanence without those perceptions which philosophy must confer. As long as man believes in death, there is no life, and what man affirms to be existence is actually the gloomy vestibule of oblivion. Buddhism became the faith of half the world because it assured man that death was but a dream and mortality an empty lie. The power exercised by Christianity over the Western Hemisphere results in great measure from its claim that for those of sufficient faith death has been forever vanquished by the resurrection of the Holy Nazarene. It is not sufficient, however, that man be simply immortal, for immortality is merely the means to an end, the infinite opportunity for achievement of ultimate perfection. It is not sufficient that man go on living after he is dead, for this would only perpetuate on a more attenuated sphere the miseries of his present state. Nor is it reasonable to presume that the phenomenon of death can produce any definite cultural results. Theology fails to interest the modern mind because it postulates an after-death state which is but small improvement over corporeal conditions. What shall it profit a man if he leaves a static earth to wander around in a static heaven? Yet philosophically, theology is nearly correct in its depiction of the so-called celestial state, for heaven is an attenuated earth where life continues on practically the same ethical and aesthetic levels as during physical existence. The mortal sphere consists of two parts, one visible, the other invisible, but both alike illusionary and material. It follows that he who gives up the illusions of mortal life must also give up the illusions of mortal death. So the philosopher who transcends the imperfections of mortal existence transcends also the corresponding imperfections of immortal existence. Heaven and hell are woven on the same loom, and he who renounces the latter must renounce the former with it. Ignorant man may go to heaven, but his heaven, like his earth, is inconsequential. The heaven whose praises are so often sung is designed primarily to augment the comfort of the animal man, to cause only pleasing reactions in the emotional nature and afford expression for desires and impulses which have their origin in the irrational soul. It therefore follows that it is an animal paradise and becomes insufficient the moment the rational soul in man is liberated from its bondage to bestial instincts. Among the ancient Vikings, for example, heaven was regarded as a hall of gluttony where heroes gorged themselves from a magic larder which ever replenished itself. Heaven, moreover, even cooperated with the feasters by making appetites more and more insatiable, the warriors only leaving their feasting long enough to stage gladiatorial combats wherein they dealt each other mortal wounds which healed immediately. It is evident that this heaven was as much a part of the irrational sphere as the physical earth itself, for it offered but enlarged opportunity for intemperance and sensuality. Would not Plato, who transcended the sordidness of earthly excesses, also transcend a heaven which existed merely to satisfy the unquenched fires of animal desire? At the entrance to the Elysian fields, where the souls of the blessed dead picked daisies and eternally chanted hymns to the deities, the Egyptians placed a great judgment hall built of rocks as solid as that of Karnak. Here Osiris, painted white and having upon his person more eyes than Argus, sat in judgment upon the shades of earth's illustrious, weighing their souls in a pair of ordinary scales. A jury and a motley group of immortals watched the proceedings with keen interest for probably the 100,000,000th time. Does not such a picture afford ample evidence that man's ignorance, unaffected by such episodes as birth and death, continues until the advent of rational consciousness? At this stage a logical subject for speculation is what happens to an individual who, believing in the reality of the theological heaven, starts out after death in search of the pearly gates and golden streets. Does their non-existence disappoint him? Philosophy answers no, for as the illusions of physical life here are perfectly tangible and real to those who believe in them, so the heavenly city with its foundation of precious stones opens its imaginary portals to all who have convinced themselves that such portals exist. As surely as humanity can delude itself with the belief that there is such a thing as a rich man, it can believe that the gods are richer still and hence can bestow wealth untold upon certain favored dead. We all live in a world of make-believe, and as we pass from the make-believers of life to the make-believers of death, we simply step up our imagination to a higher level and keep right on dreaming, declaring that to be true which never had and never will have aught of fact within its fabric. Conversely, hell is simply that state which is created for us by our own realization of the fact that if the universe has any integrity whatsoever we deserve to burn for a few millenniums at least. Stupid fears generate our hells and inane wishes our heavens. In what manner would the plan of existence be glorified by having the souls of men roasted on hot spits throughout eternity because they broke some imaginary statute of the celestial code, or, in what way would the glory of God be magnified if more fortunate souls were given grandstand seats and permitted to witness the inspiring spectacle of the devil, sitting as High Inquisitor, meting out perdition? When Parsifal, standing in the enchanted garden of Klingsor, the evil magician, elevated the holy spear and traced with it in the air the sign of the cross, the chimerical world of the sorcerer disappeared. The enchanted garden vanished, the flower maidens faded into thin air. The great gloomy castle was shaken and the liberated stones came tumbling down to vanish like mist before the rising sun. So it is with these spectral worlds, heaven, earth and hell, which the senses have taught us to believe are real. With the opened eye of his rational perceptions the sage gazes out upon a very different world. First, with mortal eyes gazing upon the illusion are seen all those treasures which in our ignorance we have held dear. But gradually as the eyes of the flesh are closed, the eye of the soul is opened and like a dream the spectacle of worldliness fades and in its place the permanent universe is revealed. The souls of men are seen passing back and forth through the swinging veils which divide the chamber of mortal existence into two compartments. Carrying the burdens of life, bent with the responsibilities of years, obsessed with the reality of matter, the tired and toil-worn wanderer exchanges life for death. But as he passes through the veil he still carries with him the old perplexities of his mortal incarceration. We may see him still bent, still broken, still afraid, creeping through the tiny rent in the veil of his existence to continue on the other side the life he cannot cast aside until he rises above his lesser self. To him death is the promise of fulfillment. So he brings with him his empty money bags that they may be filled. He seeks the waters of Lethe where resting in that state of forgetfulness of all that engenders sorrow he seeks to assuage the aching of his heart, still the spinning wheels of his mind and realize thwarted desire. The invisible world gradually assumes the appearance of the office where he labored during the years of earth life. Still the ticker sounds in his ear, telephones ring and vast projects torment his tired mind with their complexities. A little while and this soul drifts into a great vortex of endeavors, vain struggles and loosened passions. Like a mighty whirlwind his soul in company with the souls of millions is swept about in hope. Less confusion in the after-death chamber. The sighing of the wind is the mourning of deluded souls. Suddenly the curtains begin to sway and through them sweeps the torrent of air back into the world of the living. A little child creeps through a tiny rent and burdened still with the affairs of life crawls into mortal existence. The years pass and the child again becomes a man. Still the tickers sound, still the struggle for gain goes on, again the back is bent by responsibilities, the life soured by unfulfilled desire until at last, carrying with him the same possessions that bowed his back before, the soul creeps away again to rest. Yet what is rest? Just more longing, more desire, more unrequited love. Thus, age after age the wheel of the law goes round, age after age man comes and goes, bound to its spokes of agony, and this fools in their folly have termed life. All this the opened eye of philosophy lays bare, all this the sage perceives with enlightened vision. He knows the unreality of heaven as well as hell. He realizes that both are but projections in the substances of a more subtle element of the same impulses which have taken a beautiful earth and made of it a breeding ground of greed and a house of discord. Death is not a liberation from ignorance, nor is it a solution to man's problem, neither is it the end of anything. Death is but an exchange of vestments, it is no cure for that sickness of the soul which the wise term ignorance. Back and forth between the chambers of life and death man passes until he wears ruts in the stony floor he treads. Yet he is never free, for he escapes one prison but to enter another. With perennial hope he faces each new scene, only to find that he exchanges bad for worse. Birth and death are illusionary in that they seem to be a change of state when in reality they are but a change of place. Though man were lifted to the heights of Olympus he would not be greater than himself, and though he were hurled downward to the depths of the inferno, no virtue that is innately his could be taken from him. The philosopher realizes that these extremes are but illusions of his own mind and remains unmoved by either the sense of height or depth. Having mastered those attitudes and perceptions by which man is enslaved, he is free from life and death alike. He has found another door, so that he no longer travels between the two halves of the mortal sphere, but leaving the whole chamber of the world behind he ascends into that vast domain where walls are as distant as eternity and where limitations are measured by space alone. Therefore, of him it is said that he has stepped down from the wheel and has broken the fetters that once bound him to necessity, for he has accomplished the necessary end, namely, realization of the unreality of mortality. He knows the import of the sage's words, that though a man die 1,000 times yet shall he live, for he himself has died many times while still fastened to the wheel of sense. Reborn through the disciplines of philosophy he is no longer subject to death because he is no longer capable of desire. Desire breeds death, and he who has liberated himself from desire has liberated himself from death. Ignorance and death, which are synonymous in their inner nature, are indeed the last great adversary. He who vanquishes this twofold monster by that power which is the inevitable product of right thinking, has achieved conscious and enduring immortality. Life and death as we know them are but passing phases of existence. This does not mean that the philosopher achieves to the state of physical immortality, for no one who is wise desires to live forever in any one slate. It means that the rational soul, neither slumbering nor sleeping but forever awake and contemplating the face of truth, has been so liberated from the limitations of erroneous perceptions that, though bodies come and go, it remains unmoved, preserving forever that unobscured vision and unbroken continuity of reflections which alone constitutes immortality. A quality characteristic of the gods is endurance, and man approaches to divinity when he increases the span of enduring consciousness. Physical matter must abide by the law of its own substance, hence to all things composed of physical substance dissolution is inevitable. As the animal nature is, philosophically, an exudation of the mortal substances, is ultimately dissipated with the decay of forms. Consequently, he who has placed all his faith in this decaying part shall experience mentally the blight of death, for he shall behold the disintegration of that which he is pleased to term himself. If, however, he has established his rational and divine part as real, he shall remain unmoved when its inferior vehicle is dissipated, and because his faith is vested in reality shall dwell forever in rapturous contemplation of permanence. Life and death are measured by our belief, permanence is determined by our consciousness, and perfect immortality is achieved by perfect realization. Strangest of all, perfect immortality is synonymous with ultimate dissolution and of all the illusions that must go, not the least is the illusion of individuality. Having completely mastered this, the last phase of death is conquered, for as long as man believes in individuality he fears that unknown but certain ultimate when individuality is dissolved back again into the universal state. It is strange but true that all the things man fears become the instruments of his liberation. Man fears the loss of individuality, yet perfection is not attainable without it. Man fears death, yet death is simply the necessary polarizing of life that he may endure until he has learned to exchange the living death of form for the deathless life of spirit. If it were not for the opportunity that death gives us to go behind the scenes occasionally, we might become so obsessed with the dream play of mortal life that we would never wake up to its unreality. The process of alternating manifestation between the visible and invisible spheres of the inferior universe is erroneously termed metempsychosis. A swinging pendulum has been employed to symbolize that monotonous motion of the unawakened soul which results in the phenomena of successive lives and deaths. In the East Indian classics it is written that certain is death for the living and certain is life for the dead, but though the wheel spins incessantly, by the very nature of its motion it ends where it began. When the philosophers describe the descent of the soul into generation they do not mean what is now termed incarnation, but rather that the rational part has become immersed in the substances of a generated and generating world where it must remain until through the liberation of its innate rationality it escapes from the tangled web of sense and circumstance. Pythagoras tells us that the sphere of Hades or Pluto extends downward from the Milky Way through the rings of the zodiac, the orbits of the planets and the spheres of the elements. Pluto's domain is therefore synonymous with matter, not only matter that is physical but also its invisible counterpart from which the so-called invisible world is fashioned. The sphere of generation merely signifies that inferior pad of nature wherein manifestation depends upon the generation of vehicles. Generation is limited to the world of forms in that all forms are generations, being the temporary vehicles of ungenerated and immovable souls. Physical bodies as we know them are generations in that they are the fashionings of an invisible agent who creates them for the peculiar workings of its will. The fact that the soul can fabricate a physical body is proof itself that the soul is manifesting upon the level of generation, and incarnation is that process whereby the spiritual nature establishes itself upon the level of generation in order to become the formator of innumerable corporeal vehicles. Having assumed the idea of generation, the soul is capable of generating and bodies are its generations. In order to generate, the soul becomes individualized and ultimately abstractly personalized. Therefore, it is said arcanely that there is a continuity of personality throughout the cycle of incarnation, but this personality is the sole personality posited at the apex, or causal point, of the triangle of the generating sphere. The ancient philosophers affirmed that 777 physical earth lives constitute the incarnation of the human soul. Each of these earth lives is divided into a physical and superphysical part, life and death. Occupying the middle ground between the spiritual part and its generated vehicles, the soul hangs suspended from its own cause, and from it are suspended the physical personalities which manifest for a day, only to be dissolved by death into their primordial state. From this it is evident that the physical phenomena of life and death have little effect upon the spiritual status of the individual, for this status is actually measured by the degree to which he has disentangled his soul from the illusion of generation and has no reference to the corporeal or incorporeal condition of his body. The true fall of man was the descent of his soul into the cycle of necessity or sphere of generation, and his true resurrection is the ascent of the soul to its former state of non-involvement. Thus, life both before and after death is simply an allegorical ceremony during which, as in the pageantry of the mysteries, a curious ritualism is performed which recapitulates upon the physical level the entire story of man's superphysical dilemma. The bodies shadow forth the rationality of the soul. While the idea of generation is upon the soul, the bodies manifest the qualities of materiality. When the soul shakes off the drowsiness of the state of generation, the physical personalities which it objectifies manifest in an idealistic and spiritualized manner. The consciousness of man is said to exist in three general states: in an unweakened state, an awakening state, and an awakened state. Those whose souls are wholly immersed in the illusion of form are declared to be asleep. Although they may manifest activity in the phenomenal sphere, this activity being of their outer and not their inner parts, is not regarded as an evidence of wakefulness. Such souls are symbolized as lying asleep throughout the span of life. Occasionally they are depicted as covered with cobwebs, as symbolic of the weaving of their own fancies. Their bodies also are partly buried in that dust which collects upon all inert objects. This dust represents that inactivity which soon dulls the perception of the unwary, but which the just man shakes off by endeavor. Those to whom beauty means nothing, in whom there is no desire to better an imperfect state, who live but to gratify the appetites of the flesh, are the sleeping ones who, after passing unweakened through the span of physical existence, enter into the invisible world, there to lie in rows still sleeping as they slept while in the physical world. After a time, these sleeping souls drift back again, take upon themselves bodies, sleep through another life cycle, and continue this procedure until finally innate divinity, by the agency of some dire necessity, is aroused and animated to cast off its robes of lethargy. The second group, the wakening souls, are those in whom realization, while not perfected, has become an element in the cultural life. Physical existence has come to be recognized as a period of endeavor through which the divine potentialities must be liberated from the winding sheet of matter. Through the periods of both life and death, such a soul is consecrated to the attainment of wisdom. All change is regarded as fresh opportunity, and with faith in ultimate perfection the seeker eagerly pursues the quest of self. The third group, the awakened souls, are those who have cast off the grave clothes of limitation and made their escape from generation, exchanging the alternation of mortal life for the continued awareness of the inner existence. They are masters not only of the so-called terrestrial state, but having liberated their souls from the idea of generation, they ascend to that truly incorporeal world where the soul is united with the true substances of its own being, and where, dwelling in its own state, it is said to abide in a state of perfect felicity. Let us next consider the role played by love in the periodic comings and goings of the soul while in the state of generation. The law of the intellect is reason, the law of the soul is love, and the law of the body is generation. It follows that while each of these spheres is amicable toward its own qualities, when these qualities are combined to form a compound, friction results. Paracelsus tells us that the elementals, or nature spirits, live for hundreds of years because, composed of a single principle, there is the minimum of friction between their parts. To reason, established in its own essence and functioning according to its own laws, love is thus inexplicable. Likewise, the physical nature, which is established in and exists through generation, views both reason and love as antagonistic. The plans of reason are frequently thwarted by the claims of love, and both reason and love are often overwhelmed by the dictates of the animal nature, though reason unfailingly reminds the latter of its own insufficiency. Hence, the inconstancy of human attitudes is primarily due to the lack of a common denominator. Plato defined love as the longing of diversity for unity, the desire of parts to be brought together to form wholes, the instinctive urge of all creatures toward a perfect state. Realizing that reality increases in proportion as diversity is overcome, the rational soul rejoices in the union of incomplete natures, for even the least perfect of such unions contributes to the unity of the whole. The same urge that first causes souls to come into generation and unite themselves with corporeal substances later causes them, after they dissociate themselves from corporeal substances, to rise toward and mingle themselves with spiritual reality. As the essential unity of reality is apparently broken up by its descent into the sphere of generation, a condition ensues common only, however, to such as have assumed the reality of diversity. Laboring under the illusion of separateness, the fractional parts function in the consciousness of isolation. Probably no feeling can sweep over the nature of man more terrifying than that which causes him to feel absolutely alone. This doneness means the stifling of all expression. Joy and sorrow alike must be relieved by expression, otherwise, they infect the temperament with a curious disease which Robert Burton rather inadequately terms melancholy. This feeling of isolation is invariably accompanied by one of utter hopelessness, for man is essentially a social animal. While his unenlightened animal sociability causes him to seek the companionship of the phantoms of matter, still it is a necessary though imperfect expression of that spiritual quality which will ultimately unite him with the whole order of being. Physical life may be likened to a gloomy dungeon where those convicted of materiality sit in solitary confinement, each in his own little cell. Like the prisoner of Chillon, who vainly longed for the blue sky and the comrades of yore, the soul of man locked in the life of form yearns for companionship and understanding. In the tarot cards is one called Temperance, showing a winged figure pouring water from one urn into another. In the Kabbalah also it is declared that Chachma flows into Bina, that is, wisdom flows into understanding. As man at nirvana inverts that bowl which he calls himself and pours his soul into the infinite, so throughout all the ages of his unfoldment there is within his life an inherent urge to flow forth and mingle with other lives in a mystical communion. The irrational soul is ever building walls which the rational soul is ever tearing down. The irrational soul is ever emphasizing the intervals which separate living creatures, which intervals the rational soul annihilates by the realization that the divine nature can be limited by no place or condition. The mythological marriages of the gods signify the union of a principle with its form, for the god is a creative principle and his consort is the vehicle of that principle. Thus, when the soul enters into generation, a mystic marriage takes place in which a rational agent is wedded to the sphere of generation which is to be its vehicle of manifestation. At death, when the rational soul casts off generation, another marriage takes place in which the rational agent, having divorced its inferior part, is united by a symbolic ceremony to the sphere of liberation. Several philosophies differ as to the place occupied by sex in the cycle of necessity. Those who assert that sex is differentiated in the spiritual nature itself maintain an untenable hypothesis, since it is philosophically evident that spirit, which partakes of the divine wholeness though containing the potentiality of diversity, does not manifest that diversity while in a spiritual state. While androgynous may not be the true defining term, it may be employed to express the undivided state of sex in spirit, where it exists in no form other than that of a latent attribute. This theory brings up the inevitable question: if spirit is inherently androgynous and perfect, why should it manifest through a vehicle less perfect in gender? The common theory of a divided spirit, with the resultant quest of the severed parts for each other, has proved to be more poetical than practical, for unity, which is the primary attribute of the causal nature, is destroyed if two complete organisms are postulated as manifesting independently from a single cause. The modern woman, moreover, has registered in unmistakable fashion her dislike to be considered a subordinate or vagrant fraction of the masculine temperament. The secret schools of ancient philosophy postulated man as a twofold entity, which when masculine in its outer nature was feminine in its inner nature and vice versa. In each sex, therefore, one pole is objectified and the other subjectified, one nature facing outward and the other facing inward. Each sex possesses the qualities of the other, but manifests them in an inhibited degree. Human love may be defined as a reciprocal emotion in which the subjectified nature of one person is stimulated by contact with the objectified nature of another. Affection is therefore an activity, both synchronous and reciprocal, in which the subjectified nature in one person flows toward its own objectified fullness in the other, while its own objectified fullness flows into the privation of its own quality, namely, the subjectified nature of the other. Among the secret instructions of the mysteries was one concerning the law which is known to various schools as the law of consequence, compensation, karma, or cause and effect. That a principle flowing from itself must always act in conformity with the laws responsible for its own existence, is undeniable. For example, good must always manifest according to the nature of good. But as the flow recedes from its own source, it partakes ever less of the virtue of proximity to that source and consequently may exist in every conceivable degree of its own quality. Each active agent is surrounded by its own effulgence. This effulgence is the natural radiance of life and tinctures according to the nature of the radiating agent all that is brought into proximity thereto. The agent may therefore be conceived as the cause, the inevitable flow of the agent in conformity to its own nature, the effect. Hence karma may be defined as ignorance moving in accordance with its own nature and producing conditions in harmony with its own inherent state. The doctrine that whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap is based upon the law of consequence, the inevitability of action following reaction and reaction following action ad infinitum. A vicious circle is thus created in which every cause becomes an effect, and every effect becomes a cause. Here again is the cycle of necessity, a wheel of incident without beginning and without end. It is as necessary to step down from the wheel of cause and effect as it is to leave the wheel of life and death, for in the last analysis cause and life and effect and death are correlative terms. As life generates death and death generates life, so action generates reaction and reaction generates action, and to this sequence there is neither beginning nor end. Melchizedek, the initiate king of Salem, was declared to have been above the law, for karma has no control over such as are reborn out of the irrational into the rational state. Karma is the law by which irrationality multiplies itself, perpetuates its kind and ultimately dissolves all creation in a holocaust of retribution. Karma is the law of generation applied to action by which deeds are caused to reproduce their kind. It has been well said that laws are made for those who break them. This is particularly true of karma, which applies only to those irrational creatures who, due to the clouding of their rational perceptions, are capable of functioning in a manner productive of destructive reaction. It is also stated that there is not only evil karma but also good karma. In the same way, good karma is simply constructive action generating its own kind. But as action, both destructive and constructive, partakes of the illusion of matter, for action is the motion of material agents, so the laws of action on reaction, like those of life and death, are dissipated by philosophy which, by annihilating diversity, destroys the field in which these illusionary elements arrange themselves in complicated pattern. Action is a dependency of place, for it signifies the flow of a life or condition out from self into not self. Diodorus declared motion to be impossible in that it depended for its reality upon the passing of a body from the place where it is into the place where it is not, and all bodies must ever occupy the place where they are. While this statement may appear ridiculous to the uninitiated, it is based upon the philosophic verity that life is without interval and consequently incapable of action. For example, the processes taking place within life itself by which it generates form, cannot actually be termed action in that they are fourth-dimensional, coming under none of the recognizable classifications of physical activity. Bodies, however, existing in place are capable of rearrangement and of being moved about through the medium or interval in which they exist. Among the ancients, activity was considered an attribute of form and karma its correlative. The philosophic discipline consequently liberates man from all the confining bonds of matter, elevating him to that estate wherein he may truthfully say, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." It should not be inferred, however, that philosophy liberates man from the natural reactions of his actions, but rather that it liberates him from that sphere of activity which is productive of reaction. To escape from this vast turmoil of ephemeral agencies which we call mortal existence, it is necessary to discipline the rational faculties to the realization of permanence. In other words, the disciple must come to know that he is an enduring and imperishable creature entirely beyond the reach of demons dwelling in the darkness of the corporeal sphere. Like Dante, he wanders through an inferno which has no power over him other than the power he bestows upon it by acceptance of its reality. Though man be in the world, he is not of the world. That part of him which is fabricated from the illusional substances is, like Caliban, but a grotesque and unruly monster which must serve the will of the enlightened magus. To know the actual relationships existing between the parts of ourselves gives the power to directionalize these agencies toward the accomplishment of our own purposes. He who knows his body to be a body has a useful, if somewhat temperamental, servitor, but he who conceives his body to be himself has elevated a moron to power and is destined to feel the iron heel of an irrational despot upon his neck. It is essential that the student of ancient metaphysics regard himself as a permanent and immovable point which from the exaltedness of its own dignity gazes forth upon the phantasmagoria of outer existence. Such a one regards his own bodies as shadows that encircle him, as planets encircle their sovereign sun. All his forms he views as something apart from himself, for he is formless, and though functioning in a sphere of generation he is not deluded by his workmanship. Gazing upon the personalities he has objectified, he must say, "I am not they. They come forth from me to do my bidding and furnish the garment of my experience. They are like hands and feet which move at my command and withdraw themselves from outer objects at my will. These shadows live and die, yet I am not born with their birth, nor do I cease with their dying. Their coming and going alike are incidental and have no effect upon my solidarity. Immersed in the confusion of mortality, these shadows experience the twin illusions of joy and sorrow, health and sickness, gain and loss. Yet if they gain all the shadows of possession and encompass the whole illusion, they are no greater than before, for the thing they gain is nothing and the thing they lose is of equal value. If one of these shadows rises to great dignity and becomes a ruler of all the rest, what is he but nothing ruling nothing? If in despair these shadows wander about, is not their despair, like their joy, but a dream which fades into the nothingness that is its essential nature when the dreamer awakes? I close my eyes and, lo, a world of phantoms is imaged in the nothingness that I behold. These phantoms engage in intensive labors, concerning themselves with the weighty problems of their dream existence. At last, I tire of sleeping and exhausted with my own rest I open my eyes. The empire of my sleep dissolves as though it had never been, the vast but ghostly enterprises have no more substance than those who serve them. In the daylight of conscious wakefulness all the shadows of the darkness melt away, to leave in their stead only a vast expanse of luminosity. The many have vanished and the one remains. Instead of worlds there is only the I, the eternal and unchanging self which dreams creation and upon its awakening dissipates the whole. But woe unto him who in his dream unites himself with his shadows and loses sight of his mastery over them, for he then assumes the concerns of his phantom forms. He struggles for the achievements of ephemerality, he seeks to build empire out of a dream, only to finally discover the senselessness of the fabric with which he wrought, since permanence cannot be fashioned out of impermanent stuff. Then the self is tormented with every problem of the not-self. The joys and sorrows man images become so real that the goodness of life is blotted out and crushing despair broods over all. The wise live not in dreams nor in the world of dreams, but in reality. They have opened their eyes and scattered forever the shades of night, they have left behind the trooping pageantry of incident and upon the solid foundation of eternal and enduring self have builded a destiny that shall not pass away.
Thanks for watching the Wisdom Rocker. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.